alaikum. My name is Yusuf Ismail, and the program we're watching is I Beg to Differ. This is a program which focuses on socio-political, economic, and contemporaneous issues, both locally and on an international level. Today we look at the controversial subject of human trafficking. Human trafficking can basically be defined as the trafficking and trade of human beings for forced labor, sex slavery, economic exploitation by both local and international syndicates, occurring both transnationally, internationally, as well as locally. Recently, there's been an upsurge in the media of a wide variety of reports of abductions, children being kidnapped, individuals being killed, and subsequently being trafficked. Today, discussing the program, joining me in the studio, I'm joined by the Office of the Deputy Head Acting Superintendent, MS Ali, from the Durban Metro Police. Welcome. We're also joined by Dr. Monique Emser, who is the lecturer in International and Public Affairs at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and of course Brigadier Naika, who is the provincial spokesman of the SAPS. Welcome to all three of you.
Thank you.
Good to have you. Let me start off with you, Dr. Monique. Your colleague, Marcel van der Wet from UNISA, recently made an assessment and a report stating that there seemed to be a heightened amount of claims within the South African context, by no means new to South Africa, but more particularly over the recent couple of months, of children being predisposed to becoming victims of this nefarious activity of human trafficking. What's the reason for this upsurge?
Well, it's a host of issues that are available. Obviously, we have a criminogenic environment in South Africa that does make children more vulnerable to various crimes. We only need to look at violence against children that's perpetrated in this country, which has reached endemic levels, unfortunately. The children are naturally more vulnerable to being trafficked in South Africa. But what we need to be aware of in terms of this perceived upsurge is that we need to take what's actually really happening on the ground versus what's happening on social media, for instance. So there's a lot more awareness that we've seen in recent years, specifically because of social media, about what is trafficking, specifically child trafficking. However, it's important to note that not all cases of abduction and kidnapping are automatically cases of trafficking, and there needs to be a distinction drawn between the two.
Well, we're just not only talking about children. I mean, adults, for example, both men and women can be predisposed to this particular type of phenomenon. But he points out certain qualitative and quantitative data detailing this particular upsurge. And I just want to kind of zero in onto that. Is there a specific reason why? I mean, this phenomenon has been from time immemorial. There was this case in the 80s of I think 6 girls or 7 girls. 20 years later, we don't know where they are. They subsequently went missing. But more particularly, do you find the laxity in the borders in this particular context as being one of the contributing factors in terms of what's happening?
It's one factor among many. One of the things that we need to be aware of is the majority of victims in South Africa are actually South African nationals. They are victims, as being shown, and think what Marcel spoke about from the US TIP report, for example. We do see victims coming from Thailand, from Eastern Europe, for example, from Asia as well, and of course from SADC region as well. What we're seeing in terms of the laxity of borders, of course, it's easy for migrants to come across, but also in terms of using those migratory routes to also bring across trafficking victims. But one of the things that we need to be aware of is that not all foreign victims actually enter the country necessarily legally or through the borders, that they may only be trafficked and exploited once they actually reach our shores. So that's also, again, the complexities when we're talking about human trafficking. Unfortunately, because we do have porous borders, and unfortunately that there are public officials who are perhaps corrupt and complicit, we do see that there is a movement.
A lot of these cases are not, in fact, even reported. So I'm not asking you for statistics, but the approximate number of such cases may be more, may be lower, depending, of course, on the situation. Just like many of the rape cases or murder cases, a vast majority are not reported. I want to bring you in, Brigadier. This is a problem that I basically have, is that with all these cases that are basically opened of purported trafficking, if a criminal case is not registered, and this is a general perspective, an inquiry is sometimes opened, or sometimes a report is made in what we would call the occurrence book entry. So a docket is not in fact opened. What normally happens is that you have a situation, someone comes to any police station, and there's sometimes a 24-hour waiting period. What normally happens is the docket is not registered immediately. this is entered into the occurrence book entry. And the difficulty I have is that within that particular time period of 24 hours, people can obviously leave the country. They can cross the borders. What do you do in a situation like that? How do you overcome this particular problem?
Okay, that 24-hour thing is a myth. There never is and never was an issue of waiting for 24 hours. In fact, if you go to our community service centers now, you'll see we've put up posters in there because there seems to be some confusion around that. That when a person is reported immediately, a missing persons report is made. It's actually not a criminal case. In cases of abduction, then it's different because that becomes a criminal case and a docket is registered immediately. But there's no waiting period, especially with missing people.
Where does this myth come from? Because, generally speaking, I've had experiences with individuals where they approach officers, they approach stations, and generally there seems to be this kind of lackadaisical approach by either people within the charge office in terms of taking this matter, in terms of looking at other permutations surrounding why the person may be missing, but not taking this with the immediacy which may sometimes be required if the individual is involved or is in fact being trafficked or being kidnapped or being abducted. That's a problem we've got.
Yeah, no, that's why I said, well, it's been maybe about 6 months now that we've actually put up posters in our community service centers. So even the members of the public can see it, as well as the police officers there, that they need to treat missing persons and abductions seriously. Investigations need to begin immediately. There's no waiting period. So that we've cleared up that in terms of our personnel.
Well, let me bring you in, Superintendent Ali. This is a problem that I've got. If you look at 2013, and I'm just presenting statistics, in 2013, there were about 12 suspects prosecuted for alleged sex trafficking violations. This was revealed in the annual Trafficking in Persons report, which basically judges globally how countries are in fact addressing the particular problem. The United States Department of Office Trafficking in Persons report, and obviously the United States, quite ironically, has its own particular problem of trafficking, but released last month, in fact downgraded South Africa's rating and placed us on a watch list after failing for a second year to allocate further funding to anti-trafficking efforts. Now, that is a particular problem. If you look at a local expert's research, I think it's Marcel van der Vet, he's claimed that South Africa has become one of the 10 top trafficking routes worldwide. The question is, why is this the case? And if we've received a downgrading in status by TIP, then I understand the concerns you've echoed, Brigadier, and the fact that you claim that there's a concerted effort by the SAPS, but the reality on the ground seems to be somewhat different.
Yeah, you see, Yusuf, I'd like to comment on two aspects over there. The first one being, you talk about our porous borders, and South Africa, Durban, being the biggest port along the coast. A lot of traffic comes through in here. I'm talking about maritime traffic. The traffic that comes through, there are stowaways, and people see this as an ideal escape route or to gain entry into the country. That's number one. Number two, our borders are not patrolled by us, by Metro Police. Our borders and all the ports of entry are manned by the South African Police Services. As much as I derive my powers from the South African Police Services Act, there are certain limitations because we go up to arresting, we perform more or less the same functions as the SAP. We cross-pollinate with certain other functions of them. We work closely with their clusters also. But when it comes to the investigation part...
So Metro Police is not involved in the direct investigation. Admittedly, it's the SAPS. But obviously, when it comes to rescue operations, your services will obviously be co-opted.
Yes.
So there's no direct... I mean, the irony I have is this, is that you're probably familiar with the case a few years back in our local papers. Metro Police frequenting brothels in the Durban city centre. A lot of them, in fact, having individuals that are supposed to have been Thai nationals, Thai ladies, supposedly trafficked and operating within these brothels. Surely the kind of compromise, when your department's compromised, how can you in fact perform the relevant task required by the SAPS in terms of search and seizure operations or rescuing and so on?
Currently, Yusuf, as we speak right now, I know recently they had the chiefs of all the metropolitan departments meeting together with the SAP personnel. There are talks of the SAP and the Metro Police merging and becoming one united police force, so that there won't be duplication of functions.
That's been for a number of years. It's been talk from 2010.
But I think it's now more or less in an advanced stage because the country now sees it's going to make sense to have one police force in the country so that we perform the same function basically where we, the Metro Police officers, will go over to SAP for a bridging course, and vice versa. SAPS will come over to Metro Police for a bridging course. Until that happens, our hands at Metro Police is tied.
So there's limitations in terms of
There are limitations.
But Brigadier, just to go back, and I'm going to bring you in, Dr. Monique. The point, this particular report by the U.S. State Department, the NGOs, various NGOs were in fact consulted by report researchers, and they claim that one of the key factors behind the upsurge in trafficking, you have a situation where, for example, there are enormous amount of bribes paid off by syndicates to local police stations. You have, for example, instances where there's a decline in the investigation of a case. I'll just give you one particular report. An incident would refer to an officer, local South African officer, who denied the existence of legislation passed by this country, the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act, that was legislated in 2013. The officer in question was said to have denied the existence of this particular legislation. Now, if, for example, you have a situation where there is this payment, I mean, how do you basically curtail the problem that exists at a fundamental level when SAPS members are basically noted to have received enormous bribes?
Okay, I don't actually understand the question, but like I said to you, the Hawks are investigating trafficking. I'm not aware of this incident that you talk about.
Well,
but and how it pertains to trafficking.
Well, I'll just point this out. This is a research paper in relation to this particular report by the U.S. State Department. The argument of the paper is that police corruption, in fact, lowers the cost of traffickers in origin countries by facilitating the recruitment of victims. And you find a situation where traffickers are then protected from detection and prosecution. Say, for example, there is a nexus between syndicates, criminal syndicates, Bulgarian nationals, Nigerians, paying off policemen. The level of investigation then deteriorates, and of course police in many instances and stations are noted not to pursue investigation because of this relationship that exists between organized criminal syndicates and of course a number of policemen at a high level.
No, I wouldn't be. As I said, the Hawks will investigate.
Is that the case? I mean,
no, I'm not aware of that. And like I said, we don't investigate trafficking. Trafficking is done by the Hawks, and obviously they're working with Interpol and so forth. So we would not at a local police station level. We will deal with kidnappings and your abductions, missing persons, and that type of thing.
We're going to come back to that. I'm going to bring you in, Dr. Monique. We just have to go for a quick ad break, and we'll be back shortly. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. The program you're watching is I Beg to Differ, and we're discussing the important issue of human trafficking, which has reached endemic proportions in South Africa. Brigadier, I just want to bring you in, and Dr. Monique, I just want to bring you in also on this particular point. The issue I'm making, and you've probably conducted a lot of research in this, is that NGOs have reported that a lot of officers, for example, and certainly, you can't obviously paint everybody with the same brush, but a lot of officers at a high level, they've solicited sex acts from victims. You have a situation where immigration officials, private security companies, airline officials, even officials within the Department of Home Affairs were involved in facilitating the entire process, because at some level there has to be a nexus. One can't just obviously blame the police. One can't obviously blame private security companies or simply officials within the Department of Home Affairs. But there's this underlying nexus which, in fact, in many respects allows this to happen. And had the stringent mechanisms been in place, the situation would have been far more limited in terms of what we see right now.
Well, you're quite correct, because one of the biggest drivers actually of human trafficking, and a lot of research has shown, is actually corruption. There's other factors obviously involved in terms of vulnerability and supply and the laws of supply and demand. But we need to actually address issues of complicity and corruption, and that's something that we've been rather silent, unfortunately, in the South African context when dealing with the notion of public officials.
What's the inherent fear? What's the inherent fear in terms of exposing that? I mean, are there repercussions by individuals? You are part of a research unit involved in this. What's the fear in terms? Is there what are the repercussions
I think it's more to do with working relationships and those and individuals you can actually trust, because like you say correctly, you cannot just paint everybody with a single brush. And that's what often actually unfortunately happens when there's allegations of corruption, that it's not always necessarily easy to identify individuals who may be complicit in this. However, this is something we do need to address and more openly address.
The problem is the scope of the crime difficult to detect? I mean, Superintendent, do people in fact know the definition of trafficking? Are they aware of the legislation? Do they know what it entails? Because it seems to me that unlike, for example, cases like rape, murder, these specific offenses, we've had this for a number of years. When it comes to trafficking, there's a sort of a thin line in terms of defining what really constitutes trafficking and what doesn't constitute trafficking, and how do you make that distinction? I mean, that's probably one of the factors why these cases are so difficult to detect, because people don't know really what they're dealing with.
I agree with you, Yusuf. You see, in a policing environment, there's so many acts and legislation being passed all the time from government. Sometimes the information doesn't get down to ground level timelessly. And when it gets down to ground level, at local stations, at the metro police stations also, the information is not disseminated to all members rank and file. So there has to be ongoing training courses. I think education is one of the most key important factors that is lacking, that is severely lacking, because if you ask me, for example, personally, what is kidnapping and what is human trafficking, I would understand the definition, because I take it upon myself to empower myself and know these things, because being the office of the deputy head, I have to be on top of things all the time.
I mean, that distinction is not known, because the individual cases of kidnapping, which may not be linked up with an organized syndicate, and obviously a case of trafficking, which is something more sophisticated, and obviously which involves a larger number of people on that particular issue. But I want to bring you in, Brigadier, on this particular point. Recently, you have seen social media reports, and I want to just take up the issue which I think your national spokesman, Brigadier Vishnaidu, when being interviewed by Jane Dutton, I think on Thursday, pointed out the fact, I'm not so sure whether that was on a button, but he pointed out the fact that a lot of these reports and videos on social media, people can't in fact really define the geographical location of these particular area, whether these videos are in fact enacted, whether they are doctored. So where do you draw that line? Because those then who are circulating it, there's a level of irresponsibility on them, creating this mass hysteria. But at the same time, obviously endangering people who are victims of trafficking.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the previous question where we left off, and to say, in terms of the South African police, because they treat trafficking as such a high priority crime, that it's only the Hawks that will investigate it, because they have the ability to work across the country and obviously across our borders also. So that is why it's only the Hawks that investigate issues of trafficking.
With the limited resources, by the way.
I don't think so. The Hawks are well resourced. One of the best units.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, it's actually, in terms of the national instructions, in terms of the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act, there's also supposed to be a dedicated detective at each local police station who's capable of actually investigating domestic cases of trafficking itself.
Well, that's a problem, because it's not viewed as a conventional offence. And there's this assumption that it's something which needs to go to the Hawks. In the process, that long, lengthy delay, in fact, prejudices the case in question.
Of course, but this is also why we're also asking for the fact that yes, there is the Hawks, and there's in terms of the national instructions, it's also supposed to be at local police stations and capacity, and that's why we need actually dedicated capacity to investigate these cases, but by people who've been vetted. And they follow a proactive, intelligence-driven approach to these cases, because most policing, of course, is reactive. And when you're dealing with such a complex crime, like trafficking, for example, you do need to follow, a different approach.
Well, that's the point. I mean, should this be then just a specialized unit dealing with this particular issue?
No, I agree with the national point. As she says, we need people that are vetted, that are highly trained. You can't give a case of trafficking to somebody who's at a local level that's investigating kidnapping and minor cases. So they treat it very seriously. But getting to the other question in terms of what Brigadier Naidu was talking about, unfortunately, yes, we get a lot of hoaxes, and it wastes a lot of our resources also. Talking about trafficking itself, I bear knowledge of at least one case recently where we had to mobilize a whole lot of police officials one night because we were told that there was a container full of children at our port, and only to search every container and there was nothing. Some of these videos, and the concern is it's across the provinces, just not KZN, where you're getting videos that it gives you an impression like they are staged. They look like they're staged and they're not reported. There's people that are circulating voice notes saying that they spoke to highly placed police officials and talking about incidences where people have been kidnapped, but there's never been any of those cases.
I mean, you can't really prevent that, can you? I mean, unless, of course, those individuals who are found to be the source of those videos are, in fact, basically, it's a crime of defeating the ends of justice, because it's just a question of phoning a police station, telling them there's a robbery. In the meantime, there's nothing. I mean, these individuals can be charged. What I'm saying, Brigadier, is that there are steps in place to stop that. But the point is that denying the problem that I got from Brigadier Vishnaidu when I heard him is that there seemed to be this kind of apologetic motif on his part to suggest that the situation may not be as bad as it appears to be based on the hysteria that we are presently seeing. I mean, do you get that indication? That's the indication I got by suggesting on him that these were hoax videos and authenticity is questioned and so on.
Yeah, I don't think we should downplay it, because even if one child is kidnapped, that's already too many for us. We just don't want people. I think it's a problem. We can't. There's so many hoaxes, not just relating to abduction. People reporting a lot of false cases on social media. So we're not downplaying it, and I think we need to be. I think it's also shifting focus, because most of the people that are kidnapped or abducted, it's somebody who's known to them. So we have a lot of cases where children are abducted. Taking the most recent case of Miguel Lowe at Sydenham that went missing. He was allegedly abducted by someone who was known to him or to his mum and his family. We had a case on the south coast, I think it was just before Christmas, where a 3-year-old went missing at a church. And from all indications, it was somebody that was known to the child, because it was the church, it was a close community. So what we are saying is...
I mean, those are individual cases of abduction, which is distinguished and distinct from trafficking. I just want to bring in Dr. Monique, and then, of course, you, Superintendent. The report we're referring to, in fact, chastises the South African government for failing to make progress on the prosecution of traffickers. For example, particularly those syndicates involving Nigerian, Thai, Chinese, Russian, Bulgarian nationals who dominate the sex industry in several South African cities. There is a responsibility at high level, and there seems to be a lack of prioritization by departments up there. What do we do to change the situation?
I think it's one of those things where we need to recognize just how endemic many of these issues are, specifically with trafficking, because it links up to other greater societal issues that we have. So in addressing trafficking, we also need to address the root causes specifically. And these are bigger projects that link up in terms of gender-based violence, violence against children, for example. They all link to one another, and other criminal offences that are also linked to
the lack of prioritization. The point is the lack of prioritization. I mean, Acting Superintendent, just one point here. Just down the road, you walk down. This has been known for a number of years. The bottom of the suburbs are dominated by brothels, drug dens, Nigerian syndicates. And this is public knowledge. And the problem is, what does the media have a role to play? Because a lot of these dens of iniquity are publicly advertised in our national newspapers, in our local classifieds, which means that this is not a closed knowledge. This is fully known. Metro Police frequent these areas. We see this happening all the time, which means inevitably with these particular vices, there seems to be tying up to many of these criminal syndicates. Yet you find that these dens still remain open. They've been open for a number of years. What's Metro Police doing in terms of engaging in the necessary steps to curtail this?
Yusuf, in terms of Metro Police, we have various different units. We have the housing unit, we have the inner city refurbishing unit, we have the safer cities unit, and we work closely together with SAPs and with also other private security companies. We, as Metro Police, as the police force on its own, can only do so much. As we target one area, all they do is they shut down the business. They move to another area. We move to another area. we shut down that. That is why, if you have noticed recently, that Metro Police, I'm now speaking also in my personal capacity and with my other cap, Metro Police cap. We've recently embarked on the program of recruiting new people to join Metro Police. So with a beefed up force, with more policemen on the ground, hopefully we will have some successes. And in the near future, maybe by next year, we should have an extra 200 to 400 policemen on the road. But as I say again, just to add one point, as we target these areas in town, you find that these criminal syndicates move to the suburbs.
They seem to be dominating. So I'm going to stop you there. I'll be coming back to you shortly. And then, of course, Brigadier, we just have to go for a quick ad break. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to I Beg to Differ, and today we're discussing the critical subject of human trafficking, and I'm joined in the studios by Superintendent Ali, Dr. Monique, and of course Brigadier Naika. Just to respond to, so there was something you wanted to point out, the fact that he does indicate that there is a beefing up in the support structure, and of course there are different units that deal with this. The point from his perspective is that this has been done and it's been dealt with. What do you say about that?
No, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of work on the ground by SAPS and Metro. The question is, at the end of the day, a question of prioritization. They deal with, huge issues such as rape, for example, which we know is reached pandemic proportions in our country, unfortunately. And that takes away key resources. And that's one of the biggest problems when trying to address human trafficking, because it's such a complex crime. For example, investigations are lengthy in terms of this. We simply don't have the resources. And that's something we do need more of. So it is taken very seriously, but we do see in terms of SAPS and Metro being hamstrung by a lack of resources. There's
a lack of resources. I think that's, you would agree with that. There is a lack of resources in terms of dealing with this. But getting back, let's look at it at the ground root level. The average person, cutting out the sort of proverbial technicalities here, the average person in the street gets a report, somebody's gone missing. What do we do in a situation like that? What do we do, Brigadier? What to start off?
Report it immediately. Don't wait.
So the public has a child, someone goes missing, they go to school to pick up their next of kin, not around. What do? They
must report it immediately. Don't wait. Generally, unless the family knows, this child has a tendency of running away and that type of thing. So sometimes they don't report it immediately. They will search for the child in the areas that they know this child frequents before reporting it to us. But obviously, time is of the essence. When someone goes missing, they report it to us immediately, and we can start looking for the child.
Well, Debbie Schaefer, who's the MEC for Education, this is what she said. She said the safety of learners outside school gates remain beyond their control. Schools obviously need to ensure that there are safety measures in place, but whatever happens outside the school gates remain beyond their control. Surely that seems to be a kind of a shift of responsibility by the MEC of Education, suggesting that, certainly that's where it happens, outside school gates, within the immediate vicinity of areas where children are basically frequent excursions and so on. How do we deal with this? When the MEC seems to suggest that there's a burden of shift, certainly parents have a responsibility, but educators themselves, not just within the school precincts, but outside the school, there needs to be some degree of incentive on their side to take certain preventative action. I'm going to come back to you shortly.
No, I mean, definitely. If you've got school governing bodies, which is a link between parents and teachers, for example, communities need to come together and actually, formulate ways in terms of looking after children. So, for example, there's always ways in terms of, with you have helping children cross, like you have like a lollipop.
There's a walking bus initiative.
The walking bus as well.
Where parents are now surround their children walk, but that can't be done in all cases.
Well, this is the
parents go to school to work. Some parents leave their homes at early times. It's not going to be practical in every single situation.
But this is also why, it's also not practical, for the schools, because the children have to catch buses, for example, and other forms of transportation, or walk home, depending in terms of where the school is, in terms of where the parents have access to motor vehicles, whether they're working or not. So to an extent, the school cannot literally be held responsible, because what happens off school premises Unfortunately, that's in a public area. However, we can capacitate children in terms of understanding what are certain basic safety features, what to look out for in terms of that. Having a buddy system, for example, if they are traveling, together on their own, for example. But it becomes very problematic, and this is why parents also need a role to play in coming up with solutions that are feasible.
What can they do? What particular, and you've got a kind of a practical involvement in this as both as a father and
yes, Yusuf, I think you're aware that I've been working closely with schools for a number of years,
sure,
in the rural areas and in the urbanized areas. I feel personally, I'm not attacking the Department of Education. Please don't get me wrong there. I think that, education starts at home first. Yes, the parents, we educate the children, and then the working parents go to school. We leave our children at school. So by virtue of the fact we leave them there, the teachers are parentis locus also. De facto, they are the parents of our children. And at the same time, I've been advocating to teachers, to school governing bodies, because I personally sat on the school governing body. I was deputy chair at Sastre College. We should keep the children inside the school premises, within the confines, because teachers are on duty 24 hours a day.
Are teachers not doing enough?
Teachers are not doing enough because, remember, a teacher is on duty 24 hours a day. By virtue of the fact that school terminates at 1400, 1430, does not mean that their day is over. They can still be at school till 1600 hours, 1700. I'm not saying they must be there, but they can if there is an interest shown in certain areas where crime is prevalent. We've made suggestions to the school principal, keep all the kids inside, wait for the school transport to come there, uplift them, and as Monique mentioned, we get the parents involved to form these bus trains of kids walking together in a group. And we advocate, I do a lot of school education programs together with one of our captains, Captain Peter Keo, where we go out and we preach to the learners that if you see a stranger, do not go to the stranger.
Is that education enough? Because it's not just there, but at sports events, social excursions, you've got schools with a pupil population of 1,000. You've got 2 or 3 teachers, at the most sometimes 5, manning such a large number. How do they maintain that? The lack of teachers at these particular forums and events, how is their responsibility in fact enacted to ensure the safety of a whole lot of pupils, particularly at these particular schooling events where drugs are easily available, alcohol easily available, and of course you've got no restrictions in terms of who comes to these events?
I agree with you, because on a lot of occasions when I was in Sastre College as a governing body member, the school principal approached us on the events, school marches, and when they had the sports events, they called us in at Metro Police, and we infiltrated the function by plainclothed members, together with SAF members, and we've arrested these drug dealers on the premises, both from outside and inside the school. I agree with you again, there's not enough teachers, manpower on the ground, because the kids of today are not like the kids of yesterday. The yesteryear kids are different. There's respect, there's compliance. The kids of today, there's no compliance. There's nothing.
It's not only, and certainly, and I agree with you on the point, but police presence. Should there be a certain element of police presence at schools? Schools are the targets. Malls. If you go to the malls within the Durban city centre, outside, the police presence is somewhat lacking. We don't want to create the idea of a police state, but police presence is indeed lacking, because these are the target areas, key target areas, schools and your malls, and you find a total lack of police presence in these particular vicinities.
Well, our police to citizen ratio, it's very low. It's based on international norms. And obviously that's determined on a national level. Police presence is needed for all crimes, just not abductions. But going back to the other issue, as I said, whilst we educate our children, and then also schools have a role to play there, to be careful of strangers. Most of these kidnappings or abductions are taking place by people that are known to the children. And that's why I'm saying we need to educate our children on who to go to, having safe words, so the children don't just leave school with someone because they know that person, or deviate from your normal...
the safety words by their parents.
Yes, yeah.
You have situations where individuals rock up at school, they instruct the child, their parents have come to pick them up, and then the child disappears.
Because we have had cases where, the teacher would ask the child, do you know this person? Say, yes, I know them. and then they would go with this person. So
what would you
it's very
see as the recent case of Miguel that's hit? Who would you see as, without wanting to blame individuals, but there has to be at some level a degree of blame. Surely the police has to take some degree of responsibility in terms of what transpired.
I don't know how we can't be everywhere. Unfortunately, we don't have any. You can't, not in your house, not in your offices. You can't have police officers everywhere. So unfortunately, in that case, I'm not going to talk much onto that because it's sub judice and the suspect appearing in court. Unfortunately, he's been arrested. But as I said, we need to pay attention to people that are known to our children, because children generally get kidnapped by people that are known to them.
Dr. Monique, your research into this, what do you see as the trends in the South African context of the next few years?
Well, one of the things is that there's, like I've mentioned, there's a whole host of root causes that need to be addressed. Otherwise, we have created an environment where exploitation will continue to flourish.
What would be the number one root cause? Number one in terms of level of importance?
In terms of level of importance, why we need to address those dangerous attitudes and behaviors that we have in our society, specifically, in terms of towards women and children, for example, who are often our most vulnerable, unfortunately. It starts there. Questions as well in terms of inequality, discrimination, for example, as well. Unless we address those issues like human trafficking, and of course other issues in terms of abductions and kidnappings will continue, and specifically issues of rape and so forth, and other severe societal problems that we have will continue to go unabated. Because at the end of the day, a law enforcement approach will only get you so far. Unless we change what's actually happening in our communities, nothing will really actually change. And it really boils down at the end of the day is that how do people interact with one another? How do they view one another? It starts in the homes, it starts in the community, really at the end of the day. Specifically when we have questions of abuse taking place, questions of violence, it's become normalized in many communities. And that's where we need the intervention.
Just before we go for break, we see a mass media uproar on, for example, the case of Miguel and other cases that have happened in the Western Cape and so on. But people don't sometimes talk and focus on the rural areas and the rural communities where these incidents sometimes reach endemic proportions and people don't even know because of the lack of communication in these particular regions.
Yeah, no, that's true, Yusuf, it's happening. That is why the Metro Police, together with SAPS, we've now embarked on penetrating these rural areas. We go right way, because before it was, if you were in the urban area, you could get service delivery. Now, if the public cannot come to us, we go to the public. We have the huge Matsakane program in place where our officers are equipped with the knowledge. We go and we speak in the language they understand. We have road shows from time to time. Our communication officer also goes out into these rural areas. And it is frightening, as you say. What we know in the urban areas is just the tip of the iceberg.
In the rural areas.
It's the tip of the iceberg.
It's absolutely shocking.
If you go there into the rural areas, it is frightening.
Well, we just have to go for a quick ad break. We'll be back shortly. We're discussing human trafficking. Welcome back to the program I Beg to Differ. If you've just joined us, we've been having an interesting discussion over the past few minutes with Officer Ali, Dr. Monique, and of course Brigadier Naika, discussing the important issue of human trafficking. Just before we went for the break, you spoke about the root causes of trafficking, and I just want to bring you in, Superintendent, some of the root causes leading to this. Of course, what are the kind of key symptoms that we need to look at in terms of stopping this before it obviously reaches the next level?
Yeah, you see, Yusuf, I agree with what Monique has said in terms of identifying the root causes before it manifests into something that becomes so huge we can't handle it. There has to be a complete paradigm shift in the way the government thinks, in the way the NGOs think, police officers like myself and Brigadier Naika, the way we think. There has to be a complete paradigm shift. The incident of human trafficking, kidnapping, or any crime needs to be prioritized in our minds. This is important. It needs our immediate attention. Not we'll deal with it later and we'll wait. Because that few minutes, that waiting period, that could be the gap that the criminal are looking for.
The lack of attention, given to it obviously allows this to reach the next level.
Exactly.
And continue the perpetual vice that is basically occurring.
Agreed.
If there's something, if the public are faced with this danger, is there a specific hotline that people can in fact contact? Who do they phone? Do they just report this matter to the police station? If there are no near police stations available, what does the public, member of the public, concerned parent, a citizen do if he comes across such a case?
Yeah, we've got a hotline.
What's the hotline? If you can give the hotline. 0800 1011. The response time is what I'm concerned about, Brigadier. The response time. People phone, the response time sometimes is perpetually delayed. So it's just 1011.
But to give information to
Dr. Monique, are there certain NGOs or bodies or groups that focus on this that people can contact immediately if they get a lack of support structure?
Well, one of the best is actually the National Human Trafficking Resource Line, because it works also on a referral network. So in other words, you can phone it. The number is 0800 222 777, and they will also refer you to partners in the various provinces.
So it's 0800 222 777. And these have partners within different provinces.
Yeah.
What's the response time from them, and what do they deal with?
I mean, they're all, well, in terms of human trafficking, they automatically answer the phones, and they can give advice in terms of obviously reporting first and foremost to a local police station. That's the ANO, of course, but also in terms of other support structures that are available. For example, each province has a provincial task team that is actually mandated to deal with cases of human trafficking, and that's a partnership between various government departments and also NGOs. So there's a lot of support available in the individual provinces as well, but this is a very handy tool to actually use for individuals who want to find out more if they've seen something suspicious as well, find out more about trafficking and what are the reporting procedures as well.
At Durban Metro?
At Durban Metro, we do have a hotline. It's 031 361 0000.
Repeat that number again. 031?
031 361 0000.
Sure.
That's a 24-hour hotline number. You can call that at any time. Also, we have the head of Metro Police, Mr. Steve Middleton, and the deputy head, Sibonela Wiseman Mkhunu, on Facebook all the time, 24 hours. So if there is any incident and you cannot get through the hotline for any reason, you can post a message on Facebook.
What immediate relief can they get? Posting a message on social media, Facebook, that doesn't appear to be somewhat tangible in the sense of people being there 24/7 monitoring what's been posted on social media. People can post hoaxes on social media. How do you guarantee, firstly from your perspective, how would you separate the wheat from the chaff? And from the perspective of the man in the public who has a genuine concern in terms of being a victim of a particular trafficking incident, how does he ensure that obviously he'll get the necessary support?
Yusuf, I beg to differ with you on that point, and we are on the program of I beg to differ. With us, with Metro Police, we've had lots of successes. If there's a message posted on Facebook, there's immediate response. Mr. Middleton, the head of Metro Police, immediately posts out a message on a group, and I monitor the group. I'm the administrator of a group. We have a multi-operational response team unit within the Metro Police. There's a rapid response, there's special task force members there. We respond almost immediately. Our success rate and the ratio in terms of the offenses that mentioned, it's phenomenal, it's fantastic. So the public out there can be rest assured. If something is posted on Facebook, Mr. Middleton or Sibonela Wiseman Mkhunu, don't look at it and park it one side.
It's a Facebook, it's the official Facebook page of the Durban Metro Police, is that?
And it's not the official. People log on to Mr. Steve Middleton's Facebook. We do have official, not Metro Police, for the city, for eThekwini municipality. We do have an official Facebook page.
What's the Facebook page called?
But offhand, I don't want to commit myself. I don't know. But I can always get back to you and I'll give you that information. But Mr. Middleton, Steve Middleton, if you go onto Facebook, you type in his name, he is a very proactive officer. Mr. Sibonela Wiseman Mkhunu, he is also a very proactive officer. So rest assured, Yusuf, you post something there, it gets dealt with. I see Monique is shaking her head, so she must have had some
Surely.
experience.
Do you have some?
She
No,
must
I'm
have
not shaking. I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
You know, I'm
No,
agreeing
she's
with
shaking
you.
her head in agreement.
Yeah.
That's what I meant, in agreement.
Well, basically nodding her head in agreement.
Agreement, yeah.
Nodding her head in agreement.
Community
Because-
policing forums, is that because that's common where you've got, and I deal with a lot of folk from the rural community. That seems to be the first port of call. But generally what happens is people then resort to mob justice where wild accusations and allegations are bandied around. But how can the nexus be strengthened between the SAPS, community police forums, and of course, in many instances informers, because there's this connection between the SAPS and these various networks?
Yeah. Look, we welcome anybody who acts by crime, but obviously taking the law into your own hands
Certainly not.
is not something we would advise. Talking about rural areas, the issue from my side, I'm talking about abductions in the rural KZN and parts of Eastern Cape. We have the issue of Kuala, where young girls are abducted by men, generally older men, very, very old. And they're taken, abducted, they go missing, obviously. And a few days later, the suspect's family then comes to the victim's family and starts negotiations for these young girls married older men. So that is something that we're dealing with.
It's a traditional ukutwala, am I correct?
That's correct.
Ukutwala, which is still quite rife in communities, more
Yeah.
from a cultural perspective.
It's on the decline, but it's very sad also because these are very, very young girls that are kidnapped, they're deprived of schooling, they're married off to very old men, end up being pregnant in some cases, and it's sad because their lives just go downhill after that. So that's something we're working very hard with rural communities.
Is there a cause for police officers to recognize the signs of human trafficking?
As I say,
At the moment, presently?
no, not really. Not
So we
really,
don't
because
have that at the moment.
as I said, that is dealt by the Hawks. So if there's information on trafficking, we will contact and bring the Hawks.
Do you find that disturbing, Dr. Monique?
Yes, because that's not the way it's supposed to be working. And if there are instances, because there's a lot of training going on, obviously not all.
I'm not blaming you, Brigadier.
No.
It's not obviously your fault,
I think
but
it's
at a
looking
higher
the number
level.
of crimes.
Crimes.
If you look at the number
Exact-
of crimes reported, I mean, what's our prevalent crimes?
Murders,
sexual
rapes,
assaults,
robbery.
rapes, and it goes down. So,
But the problem is that the trafficking invariably leads to rape. It leads to subsequent murder, and the vast majority of
like I said,
individuals
because
don't
it's
find.
highly specialized. You don't want to. Hundreds.
But the education level, the fact that obviously when he comes across a case, he doesn't just simply identify it as a specific offense of kidnapping or abduction, but identifies the trend that is here.
Because it's so important.
But it-
So Hawks have a mandate.
1 minute, Brigadier, if you've got a message to the public on this particular critical issue, seeing what's happening in the media, seeing authentic, inauthentic, what would your message be?
Look, yeah, as I said, our biggest concern is that people seem to think that kidnappings conducted by random people who just walk onto the streets and abduct our children. It's generally people that they know. Also, agreeing with Dr. Monique in terms of just basically education and a multidisciplinary approach in changing the way and attitudes of our people, especially around crimes in general, because we arrest a lot of criminals, and we find that their families and friends come out and support them and actually chastise police. Police even get attacked when they go to arrest these criminals. So there needs to be a complete change in the attitudes of people towards crime in general.
Superintendent, your
I would-
message to the public.
Yeah, I would say that crime is everybody's responsibility. It is not only mine. It is not only Monique's
A
and
duty
yours.
to report every citizen.
Everything that you see, you report. Because one day if you see a friend of yours committing a crime, don't turn a blind eye. I would say there has to be a concerted, multifaceted approach to how we deal with this crime and who deals with it. Education is another important aspect.
Investment in the family structure.
The family structure, it starts from the parent, the father, the mother, and the siblings. We all need to educate each other. One person educates 3 people. That 3 people invariably educate another 3 people. Eventually, the entire country will be educated. There has to be a paradigm shift. There has to be a moving away of a stereotyping. I don't trust the police. I don't trust so-and-so. We have to focus and we have to deal
Dr.
with it
Monique,
differently.
1 minute. If there's something that is critical and important that the public need to hear, what would it be?
Well, I concur with both my colleagues in terms of what they've said.
You don't differ with either of them.
I don't differ with either of them. I agree completely. We need to be aware in terms of what human trafficking is. I think education is incredibly important, but also in terms of capacitation and resource allocation, specifically to frontline responders, such as SAPS Metro, for example, capacitating and creating dedicated capacity to investigate these crimes, but also in terms of educating key stakeholders, in terms of, for example, national instructions and other directives is vitally important, but also the public in terms of education based on facts and not hysteria.
Well, thank you. I have to stop there. Thank you very much, Superintendent Ali, Dr. Monique, Brigadier Naka. It's been a pleasure having the three of you. Thank you to you, the viewer. The program you've been watching is I Beg to Differ. This is a program which focuses on social, political, economic and interactive debate, both locally and on an international level. We've been discussing this evening the very important subject of human trafficking, which seems to be reaching endemic proportions in South African society. And join us next week for more interactive debate on I Beg to Differ. This is Yusuf Ismail signing off from ITV. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.